When I was in my early 20s, I was working in Tanzania in East Africa, and I took a month out to go and work as an assistant instructor at an outdoor pursuit centre on the slopes of Kilimanjaro. We had 50 boys, well, young men, 17 to 18, and they were divided into 5 groups of 10, and I was given charge over one group of 10. And the group was required to appoint a leader from amongst themselves, which rotated through the course. And at the beginning, as you can imagine, the ones who imposed themselves as leaders were the big guys, the strong guys, the alpha males, as you might call them. But the course was very testing, physically and mentally. And towards the end, it was one guy emerged as the natural leader of the group, a young Ugandan called Joseph, about that high and fairly quiet. He was the one the group followed. And I learned a lot from Joseph. I learned that you don't have to be in a position of leadership to start exercising leadership. Because he exercised leadership from day one by his example, by the way he worked always for the good of the team, not to make himself look good, and the ideas that he contributed to others. Now, I fast forward then about 30 odd years to the Middle East. When I first went to work there, one of our managers would come into the regional offices, one of the regional offices, and he would call his direct reports in one by one, and he would shout at them, and he would tell them what a lousy job they're doing. And they didn't like it, but no one was terribly surprised. That's how it was. Now, I've had the privilege of working in different cultures and working for different leaders in different cultures and being in some leadership positions in different cultures. And I've learned from those situations, good and bad, I've learned that we may have a different idea of a leader worth following depending to some extent on our culture and personality. Some like a command and control culture. Some prefer, mostly in this country, a consensus type of leader. When I first went to the Middle East, someone said to me cynically, "Graham, the way to succeed here is you kiss up and you kick down." Different culture. But I've learned also that all leaders are flawed. They're just flawed in different ways and to different degrees. I've learned that sometimes you may get stuck with a bad leader, as Andrew mentioned earlier, and that can be part of God's testing of you. I've learned that just because leaders have huge followings, it does not necessarily make them a leader worth following. If you look back in history, just think of an extreme example such as Adolf Hitler to illustrate that point. So what are the qualities of a leader worth following in any culture, in any situation? First, in terms of personal attributes, these are my own reflections, by the way, these are what I've learned from the mistakes of myself and of other people I've observed and their good points. But a leader worth following knows where they're going and communicates that and motivates others to follow. I've spent a lot of my life in meetings, and a few nodding heads there. And so forgive me if I illustrate with a few meetings. I recall sitting in one meeting at the back when a young guy was trying to share his strategy for his part of the business for the next 3 years. And there was a lot of PowerPoint slides, a lot of graphics, a lot of waving of hands. But I sat at the back and I turned to the person next to me and I said, "Do you know where he's going with this?" And she said, "No, and I don't think he does either." And there's a failure to communicate. Leaders got to be able to motivate. I remember another meeting when a divisional head was sharing his vision for the future. And people were leaning forward in their seats a little bit. They wanted to know what vision was going to be unveiled that we could all embrace and buy into. And towards the end, after a great fanfare, he unveiled his last slide. $25 million. I think it was an EBIT target and probably about 5 times what we were making at the time. And there was a slump in the room. Because people are not necessarily motivated by that. The person next to me nudged me and said, "That's not a vision, that's a number." It wasn't enough to motivate. So a leader's got to be able to communicate and motivate. And by communicate, I don't mean they've got to be super eloquent. Because you can communicate very simply. You gather a team into a room and you say to them, we are going to win this job, and this is how we're going to do it. No big speeches, just clear, simple communication. A leader worth following too has also got high integrity standards, high ethical standards. I was very pleased to have worked for a company for 25 years that had integrity as its core value and tried to drive that down from the top. We actually had a global prize for integrity. And it wasn't just window dressing, it was won one year by some junior administrators who had blown the whistle on some bad practice in a foreign country. Integrity, a core value for a leader. And willingness to listen. This doesn't rank high on everybody's list, but it ranks on mine. I was talking to a young man the other day in his early 30s. I said, what do you value in a leader? And he said, I just want them to be open to ideas, not closed in their thinking. A willingness to listen. So 3 personal qualities: able to communicate, motivate, integrity, willingness to listen. I think a leader worth following also you can see by their attitude and the way they deal with their organisation or their enterprise or their team, whatever unit it is that they are leading. And a standout quality there, I think, is an attitude of stewardship. Not good on me for having been so clever to reach the top, but a different view. Mark Green, in his book Fruitfulness on the Front Line, tells a lovely story of a principal of a school. And she'd had a terrible day. The heating broke down in the middle of winter. She had a problem with a child. They had to suspend for a while. And she came home at the end of the day totally exhausted. And she said, I found myself thinking, thank you, Lord, for entrusting me with all this responsibility. I think that's a wonderful attitude of a steward. Thank you for entrusting me with this responsibility I have for a while. You can also tell a leader worth following, I believe, by the way they engage with their organisation in terms of, are they out for the good of the team, the organisation, or primarily for themselves? One of the best leadership meetings I ever attended was in the US, and we were addressed by Carlos Gutierrez, who was then the CEO of Kellogg. And he had 4 points. I've forgotten 3 of them, but one I remembered. He said, believe in something bigger than yourself. This was not a Christian meeting. This was totally secular. Believe in something bigger than yourself. And he said, if you're only in it for yourself, your profile, your perks, your performance review, others will see it and smell it. And I thought, how true that is. It was illustrated shortly afterwards. I was sitting with the leader of our North American business, and we were at a function. We'd been addressed by a leader from a client organisation. And as I turned to her, she was watching 2 people from our company make their way over to talk to the visiting speaker. And she said, watch this, Graham. She said, one of those people is going over because they genuinely want to build a relationship between the company and the client. The other one's going over because he wants us all to see him talking to someone important. What did we pick up in the reading earlier? They do it for people to see. So, some personal qualities, how you engage with the organisation, and also the way you lead your team. Your care of other people, your care for the team. One of the lessons I've learned is that a leader worth following doesn't ask people to do what they wouldn't do themselves or go where they wouldn't go. About, must be 25 or 30 years ago now, we won some work in Laos. It was not long after the war had settled down, and it was a road project. And there was a lot of minefields, a lot of unexploded ordnance. It was quite a dangerous little situation for a while. And the director responsible was going out with the team. And I said to him, oh, you're going? And he said, yes, Graham. He said, I can't ask people to go where I'm not prepared to go myself. What a great attitude. That won my respect immediately. In terms of duty of care, I learned this on a much smaller scale as a young manager. We were working late in the office. And about 8 or 9 o'clock, one of the young females went home, and she returned about 10 minutes later in some distress. She was shaking. She'd been threatened in the car park and ran away back up the lift to the office. And that was a wake-up call to us. And I thought, we've got to do this differently. If we're going to ask people to work late, we're going to escort people to their cars afterwards. We're going to give them taxi vouchers to get home so they don't have to wait on their own at a bus stop at 10:30 at night. We're going to look after them, and of course we're going to give them some pizza and Red Bull to keep them going. But a leader worth following looks after their team. Leader worth following also is down in the trenches with the team when the going is tough. They're not on the 42nd floor, bunkered down in their office, writing emails to their boss to make themselves look good and come out of the problem unscathed. They're down with the team. And they're saying, okay, what are we going to do? This is what you should do, this is what you should do. I will go and see the client. I will go and talk to the union. I will go and talk to the boss. I will fix this. A leader's got to take that responsibility. Now, I jotted down those thoughts from my own experience, some of the things I've learned. And after I'd done that, I started to reflect on the life of Jesus, the man, and his 3 years of ministry, as a leader of men. And to my delight, I found that the Lord Jesus Christ exhibited all those qualities absolutely to perfection. He knew where he was going, he communicated that, and he motivated his followers. He was totally honest, of course. He listened. He was totally committed to the task the Father had entrusted to him. He was always living for the big picture, which was the glory of God. He cared for his followers. He laid down his life for them. He didn't ask them to do or to go where he had not gone himself. So folks, there's a load of leadership models out there, aren't there? But let's not neglect the best leadership model of all, which is Jesus. There are loads of leadership books out there. You can fill your home shelves with them. But let's not neglect the one book that tells us about leadership the best. A friend who's a former leader of one of Australia's police forces retired recently, and he said towards the end of his career, he said, I serve God by serving the people and the officers for whose safety I am responsible. You ask me where I get my leadership style from, I get it straight from the Bible. He was a leader worth following. Thank you.